This is hell.
Chicago's mayor, Lori Lightfoot, 2.5 years into her first term in office, an office she attained by running as a progressive who would invest in communities far more than her predecessor ever did, while reforming a police department that desperately needed it. She insists that the 2022 city budget she just signed is the most progressive in the city's history. After all, unlike earlier budgets, a coalition of activists worked hard to get spending on programs that the former mayor thoroughly neglected. But as today's guest and their collaborators argues, this budget isn't as progressive as the mayor and some activists want you to believe. Here to help us have a better understanding of Chicago's budget for 2022 and the impact activists had on it, Jasson Perez is co-author of the Rampant mag article, Crumbs and Police Funding, Assessing the New Chicago Budget, which Jasson wrote with Bettina J. and past This Is Hell guest Brian Bean. Welcome to This Is Hell, Jasson.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
It's great having you on the show. I'm so glad that we're going to be able to talk about this. We've been spending far too much time overseas and in other places that, sure, them needs the attention, but at the same time, let's get back to Chicago and find out what's happening here. You write on Wednesday,
Chicago over everything.
Yeah, that's right. You write on Wednesday, October 27th, Lori Lightfoot celebrated passing her 2022 budget in what the Sun-Times described as record time and the most tranquil budget season in recent memory. Lightfoot boasted that she delivered the most progressive budget in the history of the city. We have a more critical view of the budget and think reflecting on its passage is important. So, Jasson, why do you think this passed in record time? If it wasn't a progressive budget, why was it passed in such a tranquil fashion? Or is that why it was passed in a tranquil fashion, because it wasn't progressive?
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have all those answers, I think, we were, at least with the article, we just wanted, there seemed to be a feeling within some folks, like some organizations within progressive and socialist circles that wanted to, paint some of the aspects of the budget overall as like a progressive victory and even perhaps like a socialist victory. And an example of particularly an example of, what makes a good compromise, for socialists on those terms. And so we obviously really disagreed with that. Wanted just to lay out a clear reason why. But the mayor had come out fairly early that she wanted the budget to be wrapped up sooner. So, and which I'm not particularly against, it's easier to do good actions when the weather's a little bit warmer in late October instead of early December when the budget usually gets passed. So, but yeah, so yeah.
But one thing I was thinking about is, Mayor Lightfoot, is she correct that this is the most progressive budget in the history of the city because the city has never had a progressive budget before?
No. I think, and that's where we're trying to go with the point around. So, just to, we're doing this in the spirit of like a conversation and a dialogue with, like a lot of our colleagues and comrades, that we're really close to and that we struggled with, especially along like the socialist electoral project. But, the piece that we said around, that, to even return like some of let's say, for example, the mental health clinic spending, right, to pre-ROM levels, right, you need around 25 million. CCW, I think, put the figure around 100 million. And that's like within the context of like not a robust progressive kind of, like Warren Bernie Sanders style progressive type of mental health services within the city of Chicago. So, we just feel like the bar was being misrepresented, certainly by Lightfoot, which is fine. That Lightfoot's going to do what Lightfoot's going to do. But at least in terms of, and I don't think misrepresented, but just like, we weren't using the right measurements of like, how should we measure like a progressive victory or a socialist victory? And so I don't think it's progressive. The main reasons is because of the police funding increase, right? The property tax increase, and particularly at a municipal level, most property tax increases should be viewed as a form of regressive taxation that primarily benefits developers and landowners at the expense of renters. And even like property, and that's why I say like landowners, like people who just own like tons of actual land within the city of Chicago and property versus like single home owners, right? Which is very different. And then the last piece was like the commitment to pay out the banks at the level of interest and fees that we're currently paying off, our quote unquote debt to the banks for that. Like, as the city of Chicago, we don't have to pay that debt. We're one of the largest economies in the world, let alone in the United States of America. And, we could easily renegotiate anything with the bank. And also we could easily, not pay out the bank and still be fine with our funding. So, and I can get into the technical details of that later, but so there's three big reasons on it. And then the money on the other side towards social services doesn't even get to like, let's say Harold Washington era, or even First Daley era, well, Second Daley and First Daley era, like especially but Second Daley pre-privatization levels of funding for social services. It doesn't even get to those levels. So, so those are the things we just wanted to kind of put into context in terms of what we're measuring and conceptualizing what is or isn't a progressive budget. So that was a little bit long-winded. My apologies.
Oh, no, go on. I mean, that's why we're having a long-form interview. That's what we do here on the show. I want you to go in depth on this. You mentioned the CCW. That's the Collaborative for Community Wellness. I just want to make sure.
My apologies.
No, that's fine. But one of the things that you also point out in the article with your collaborators is that in Chicago, with the strength of our movements and the number of socialist city councilors in office, how we evaluate the budget is an important task as it reflects on our future organizing strategy. This assessment thus far bears marks of confusion. Indeed, the votes of alderpersons affiliated with the Democratic Socialists of America were not consistent, with 4 voting in favor of the budget and 2 voting against it. So what would you say, Jasson, to a DSA-affiliated alderperson who argues they did not want to spend whatever political capital they had on voting against a budget they knew was going to pass? How damaging could voting against the mayor's budget be for a DSA-affiliated alderperson's agenda?
Yeah, I mean, they're all members of DSA, and and I think that they can like speak to their votes. I think my concern, and I think our concern when we're writing this, is that we didn't want this to be about aldermen who did like bad votes versus good votes. Like we don't, we were much more concerned about like we were much more concerned about like the lack of political program and strategy that as socialists that we have as members who are part of DSA, and then also like the budget coalition table that was present, like with groups like UWF, United Working Families, Grassroots Collaborative, Chicago Teachers Union, and then, Democratic Socialists of America, groups like that. We were more concerned with that, like that, how that table is currently constructed is more concerned with process at the expense of like a political program that's socialist and abolitionist. And because of that, then that fed into the divided nature of the vote amongst the socialists themselves. But, the Socialist Caucus, right, which is actually 5 members, is a woefully underfunded caucus in the city of Chicago. Like, just for comparison, the Progressive Caucus has, I think, 1 full-time staff at least, and then a few other staff who support like part-time or like ad hoc, like add hours to it to like actually support the making of that caucus and keep it running. The Socialist Caucus that doesn't have that, and the organizations that support it, like Chicago Teachers Union, SEIU, HCII, they could easily, give money so that they can actually have the staffing needed so that they can, get on the same page, but they don't have that. And, that's part of like the things we were trying to tease out was that, when you don't have the right infrastructure around folks and around people like the alder people, but then also around like our larger electoral project, especially our socialist electoral project within DSA, then, this is what happens. You have a confused process where people aren't on the same page. They're all over the place. And the side that has more money and more staffing and more resources, are able to get, their side together better and out organize us. So that's, and that's our concern, and that's what we want the conversation to be, instead of the conversation falling into like either like the grandstanding of like, this is a real progressive victory, this is the best thing the socialists have ever done, which is on one side, or these aldermen who voted this way, they betrayed A, B, and C. And it's usually people who are saying this are a part of the same organization that those socialist aldermen are a part of, or are comrades with those other organizations. So it's on us also. It's not just on the aldermen to figure out like what to do next, especially when the next budget season comes.
Is that a dead end, just blaming it on the aldermen?
Yeah, I think yeah, I think it is. I do. I mean, I think there is for sure moments where that does happen, and where it's genuine. Like, I think the votes that Maria Hadden and Andrzej Aveskas gave last year, did last year in favor of the budget. I think it was right to blame those aldermen, and that they did go against what I think constituents wanted, and what like the larger like progressive and socialist electoral project was going after, and they didn't. I mean, theirs was not an effective compromise at all. What they claimed they got last year is what, in fact, like the 4 aldermen who voted yes actually got, done in the budget this year, in terms of actually funding program, funding the mental health clinics in a way that hasn't been funded in, almost 20 years, since Daley, the second Daley was mayor. So, I mean, these are real changes and meaningful material changes in people's lives, which didn't happen last year, which is why those votes were bad. But we wanted to, and that's usually like, it's usually a little bit easier to judge those and like move on those and be like, you're wrong for this. And, you want to hold people's feet to the fire. I think it gets a little bit harder when it's something where, you do have about $1.2 billion of progressive funding and revenue put into the budget that was not going to be put into it unless, all the different groups of the public budget coalition table and the socialist aldermen, fought to make that happen. We just wanted to, just be cautious about how we think that this is a blueprint or a model for moving forward, because we don't think it's a blueprint or a model for moving forward when it comes within the context of more 11% increase in police funding, an increase in property taxes, and then a commitment to continue paying banks, money that they shouldn't have in the first place,
Why, this is just a big picture question, why are mental health services so important to grassroots activists, to organizers, community organizers? Why is there so much importance and so much focus by the left, by progressives, or not by progressives, but by the left on mental health services?
I mean, Chicago is, I think especially in Chicago, it was one of the few cities that had, what you could call like a robust public mental health facilities. And that was fought by over decades by many like radical and progressive groups beforehand. And so, Daley and then Rahm in particular made every effort to gut it, to privatize it. And currently what we have now is like this patchwork of kind of nonprofit type mental health services. We wanted to be free and accessible to the public. A lot of times, many people, even if they have like, especially, working class folks, even if they have health insurance, it's like, very narrow health insurance, which is usually for what's, I guess defined as quote unquote medical health. I mean, these definitions are BS, but, they don't support mental health services in the way that they need to. And so people have to come out of pocket, or they just don't get it. Or it's just not accessible, right? Like the mental health clinics in particular in Chicago are usually in more accessible places in Black and Latinx working class communities. So, and also as an opportunity to, this might be getting too much into the weeds around budgets, right? But there's areas that you can fund in budgets where then once you fund them, the money is like baked in there. like for a long time, right? And then other areas where even if you fund them one year, they won't get funded next year, right? And so, the nature of the compromise for the mental health clinics, in particular, was good, in the sense of that, like the money is baked into the budget, like for the foreseeable future for a long time. Our only contention was that the number, that it's a good start and it's a good beginning, and the people who fought for that would say that also, but that we just wanted to point out that it's far less than even from how we understand it. If people have different figures, that's I'm open to them. But how I understand it, it's still under the amount of money that Brahm funded them at, and then certainly under the amount of money per year that, of course, Mayor Daley funded them at. And I don't think anyone would say that under Mayor Daley we had a progressive mental health system with the funding levels that were there at that time. And so, we're socialists and we're progressives, right? I mean, I'm a socialist. I'm a revolutionary socialist. So, ultimately, I believe that, like, we have to topple this thing. We have to topple the capitalist state, the racial capitalist state in this country, in order to bring about socialism, or even kind of Elizabeth Warren style progressivism. But in order to get there, I think it's important to have an electoral strategy and a legislative strategy as part of the way to get there. But if we're going to choose to go that route, we have to make sure that when we do make compromises, we do it in a way that empowers the left, makes the left stronger, and also makes the working class stronger, and not in a way that disempowers the left and disempowers the working class. And more police and regressive punitive taxation, like the current property tax system that we live under, which, I'm pro-tax, right? I'm not like a libertarian or anything, I'm not anti-tax, but when you have regressive and punitive taxes, they have an effect of, right, corroding working class power, left power, and enabling, 1% power and, rich people.
So I just want to pause on that just for a second, because you mentioned this before, and I want to make sure people understand this. How are property taxes regressive? How are property taxes where everybody pays the exact same amount? How is that more of a burden on the poor than it is on the wealthy?
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of ways we could have a progressive property tax system, right? And sometimes, another thing that was happening with the budget stuff was people would be like, well, we can't do progressive revenue stuff, or we can't do progressive property tax like stuff because in Chicago, Chicago's banned from doing things based on income, right? So, but that ban is based on just on taxation, right? It's not based on fines. It's not based on fees. And there's other ways to determine income, or just general wealth that a person has, that's not tied directly to income in terms of how the bill is written that comes from Illinois, saying that. So there's ways to do that, but so our current property tax regime is regressive in two big ways, right? It's first of all, even though we're in Cook County and all the money should be shared, within all of Cook County, right? We're 50 different school districts, all these different things. So then the money doesn't come in equitably that way, which is a lot of the suburbs, right? They have more money than the residents of city of Chicago, when we want those tax dollars. And then the other way is that within city of Chicago itself, it's just like any other kind of flat tax, is that, let's say if, I don't know, if I have $10, right, and you're taxing me at, so if it costs $70 to live, right? Or no, I'm sorry, $7. If it costs $7 to live, right? I have $10, and you tax me at 50%. All I will have is $50 left, right? So then I don't have enough money to live. a rich person, right? Let's say you tax, you do the same tax to them, right? Um, whatchamacallit, you tax them at 50%, they will then have enough money to live on. Like they will still be able to provide for themselves. They'll have enough money to live on and like spend the money on any other frivolous thing that they want to, as they should. And that's like basically what's happening to property owners in Chicago. And for sure, renters, is that if you own a single family home, like let's say in Inglewood, or like where the Obama Library is being built up, or where the Tiger Woods golf course is being built up, property taxes are going through the roof, right? Those are the areas in the city of Chicago that had the highest property taxes increases in the past 5 years. A lot of times in those property tax increases outpace the cost of the act to pay down the mortgage itself. Or a lot of times these folks are not even paying down a mortgage anymore. They pay all they pay for is property tax. But then that property tax payment monthly becomes bigger than even what their mortgage payment was. So then, whereas, you have like huge millionaire, like, like millionaire, like 100 millionaire developers who are able to have like, 30 or 40 properties, and they pay that same amount of tax, but it's a lot less of a tax burden because they just have more cash on hand. So yeah, that was a little bit all over the place, but hopefully that helped a little bit.
Yeah, it did. You are in the Chicago Democratic Socialists of America, in their statement on the budget, they say the CDSA was a part of the 2022 Chicago Budget Coalition, a table of Chicago progressive and leftist groups that represented the most organized presence of the left to agitate around the city budget since the Harold Washington era. Is the Chicago Budget Coalition in and of itself a victory for progressives or socialists? Is this a potential stepping stone for more power for the left in Chicago?
I mean, I think it can be, right? But, just currently it's not. And, I think an example of this is, there's a tendency of like an over-reliance on the older folks to like be the lead people on everything. And then also a lack of a commitment to want to really fight on the issue of property taxes, and also fight on the issue of defund, right? Like of defunding the police and investing in our communities. And as long as that posture is taken, then, we're not gonna, we're not gonna get to where we gotta go. And by fight for it, we just basically mean that, like, just, making sure that you're having like, phone banks to aldermen, making sure that you're doing door knocking, making sure that you're doing all the things that a political operation is supposed to do in order to win. So, I mean, I think the other missing piece is that a lack of a coherent, agreed upon political strategy that's attached to our political platform, as socialists and abolitionists. I think what happened with this budget is that everyone started really fetishizing the process or technical aspects of the budget, right? Like, this part means this, so we can't do that. We talked to all these groups and they said, okay, so that's fine. And, in order to build a good like socialist movement, or just any sort of radical movement, it's able to combine political program, which is like the politics that we believe in, right? So like, we as radicals, and then we as leftists and socialists believe in progressive taxation. We believe in funding communities and less funding in police. We believe in public mental health care, right? Like, public health care, period. There's all these different, like, very solid things and explainable things. And the things that we usually run on is our political platform. And then you have a process, which is like what the coalition budget table is, that has to, and then you have like the technical aspects of like how a thing works, like a policy, budgets, how you get it implemented, even once you get it passed, how do you make sure, they follow through and actually implement the thing, and it's the marriage of those three things that are important. And, in a neoliberal world, especially, and in like the liberal imagination, and sometimes in the progressive imagination, you let whoever, the process and the technical aspects trump the actual political program that you're trying to win. And why do we need the political program? In order to keep on getting the wins that we've had electorally, right? When we run as socialists, we make a lot of promises to people, right? We promise some aspect of like equitable education, some aspect of fixing income inequality, some redress around public safety in terms of police brutality and violence, and in terms of alternatives to policing, and then on top of it, fully funded community centers, park districts, public transportation, all these things, right? Like these are the things that most socialists run on in anywhere that you go on. And so if we're not actually delivering those material wins, it's hard to build a coalition of the working class that we need in order to sustain those wins, and for sure to expand the amount of socialists that we have in office. And without that, then, I would argue then you have less oxygen for the social movements that we want to see keep going, right? Like having the Socialist Caucus and the Socialist presence during the uprisings was really, really important, right? It gave a legitimacy to the protests that were happening, and especially to the people who were being incarcerated while the protests were happening, to show that like what Mayor Lightfoot was doing was wrong. And we need more of that. But if we're not delivering on our political platform first and foremost, and making it about like process and technical aspects of it, then we're just as bad as what just happened with the infrastructure bill, where it's just like, I don't care if there's a fucking filibuster. I just need the thing passed, and y'all need to pass it and make it happen, yeah.
So you also point out that neither the Collaborative for Community Wellness nor Lightfoot's figure would provide a socialist conception of a robust, non-carceral public mental health service that would transform the lives of the working class in Chicago. Even CCW's figure would be returned to the status quo, which was a bare minimum to meet the needs of Chicagoans. That makes the deal for $6.5 million even more concerning and puzzling, especially when other comrades, allied organizations, and select socialist alderpersons frame it as a pivotal win or victory instead of the bare minimum that it is. So what's wrong with getting something rather than nothing and claiming that something is a big victory? What could that mean for future funding of any mental health services in Chicago or the socialist or progressive agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big picture on it is that yes, the compromise, right? And I'm more of like an abolition realist and socialist. A lot of my comrades are more on the anarchist bent, right? And they have huge criticisms of the electoral socialist project, and I think at some level, rightfully so, right? And I think this is a really fragile experiment of trying to elect socialists into office, right? We've been only doing this for a little bit, and we're trying to figure our way through it. And so when we do make these kind of compromises, it's important that we make them in a way that, as I said before, empowers our base, right? And empowers our people and puts us in a position to win even more seats in the future, which then allows us to deliver more on like the political program that we're fighting for. The issue with, this, the issue was the nature of the compromise versus compromising in and of itself, which is, we felt that had echoes and remnant of why social democracy failed in the face of neoliberalism, which is that, and why the Great Society failed, why the biggest failures of the New Deal, one, part of them was due to racism, but then another part was a commitment to, I think, people don't necessarily see this as this, but it's, it's connected at some level to anti-communism, but a commitment to either paying for military, right, or paying for police and prisons, right? So some form of carceral punitive institutions within society, which I would say are like the state-making forms of society versus, the democratic government forms making of society, which is like affordable housing, social welfare programs. And if we keep on doing compromises where, we get we get some of our social programs, and even if we get like social programs at the level of New Deal and Great Society, right, which was like, you got so much, they got so much money, and then cities also got so much money. I mean, that's how, modern public housing came to be, right? But we did it at the expense of, I mean, it was one part racism, but then another part of a commitment, and they're intertwined too, but like a commitment to funding police, to and funding police in a way that then led to the undermining of those very social welfare programs, at like a technical level, right? But then in terms of like why then public housing fell apart, why then schools became underfunded, but then at the political level also, in terms of, you say you're a radical, you say you're a progressive, you say you're a Democrat, whatever, but then you're not delivering on these core things as the politician that you said you're going to deliver on, or if you do, they're very, very much compromised. So why keep going with it? And I think an impact of neoliberalism has been that we don't even understand how robust social democracy was, or like the liberal version of social democracy was in this country, that then like when we see like the marginal increases in social welfare spending that we got this year in Chicago, we think that's a pivotal shift, versus understanding that it's not even the amount of money that social programming money that was happening under the second Daley administration, which is, I mean, that's the administration that like privatized everything, like that's the administration that like brought us to this, that ushered in neoliberalism in really fundamental ways. So, and we just got to get that right. We just got to figure out a way through it. I don't think there's any easy answers, but we got to struggle through it. And we were just really worried when we started hearing a lot of our comrades start framing this as a victory. And we feel like the more appropriate thing was to say that this is a compromise, and this is the best that we can do. And, it was a product of like some disorganization on our part and some just rough back and forth on our part. And, we're trying to do something here. We want to do better, and we're going to do better. Let's try to figure it out. And, I think that type of posture, is better for the project overall, instead of trying to get into this competition of saying either this is the worst thing ever and this is like a crime against humanity, or, this is the best victory ever. And, like socialists are on the rise, so I think, but both of those approaches don't really get us anywhere.
We are speaking with Jasson Perez, co-author of the Rampant Mag article, Crumbs and Police Funding, Assessing the New Chicago Budget. You can follow Jasson on Twitter at Iola Ella. That's IOLAELLA. You and your colleagues write that what the budget did deliver came directly from the largesse of federal aid money, accounting for $3.5 billion of this year's budget, roughly 22% of the total. This money, primarily CARES Act and American Rescue Plan funds, will expire, putting the security of these social programs, primarily funded by those federal dollars, at risk. So after those federal funds related to the pandemic are gone, without further emergencies or further emergency aid money, will Chicago return to what little money the Rahm Emanuel administration did put into mental health?
No. I mean, like the money around mental health, and that was like spearheaded by like Alderman Rosanna, is on pretty solid footing, right? The other programs, that's not the case, right? And so, and so that's, and that's terrible. And, the reasons why it's terrible is because like, then we're gonna have to fight for these things all over again. We're gonna have to fight for more funding of it. All this funding was incremental funding, right? And, we need much more funding to actually meet the needs of the people that are out there. And then also we need much more funding just to like politically show that like it's been impactful and that it's worth something, So, and that's why we were pushing the piece on progressive revenue too, that some form of progressive revenue should have been on the table in order to guarantee the future of the funding of these programs. Because if not, then it's going to be the same old, which is right what we saw with the budget, which is some cuts here, some marginal increases in social welfare spending, and then huge increase for policing, which is what we just saw.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of the things you mentioned earlier, I wanted to get back to. You write that the public debt that constrains public funding in Chicago is a liberal political construction that can largely be overcome at the city level. But as far as we know, no such attempts were made, which then positioned us within the political calculus of neoliberalism, of austerity, or minimal funding of basic social programs. How, in your opinion, is public debt a liberal political construction?
Yeah, I mean, there's a story, and this is like within like progressive left economics kind of talk, but like, and like in policy circles, right? There's this thing of that, like, well, we can't do this because the state doesn't allow A, B, and C, right? Or we can't do this because, and it's tied to funding, and that's true, right? Like, so, organizations like ALEC and the right wing have been phenomenal, unfortunately, at highly organized, and they're much better resourced than we are at making sure that when it comes to things like progressive taxation, that it's really hard for cities to do to engage in it and make it happen. But a city, especially if a city has like a fairly good economy, has multiple ways to finance itself. You don't need taxation just to finance yourself. One easy way is just through a public bank, right? Another way is through a city starting to issue its own currency. Another way is, cities working together to put the demands on the Federal Reserve to be able to lend, to be able to get money directly from the Federal Reserve instead of having to go to banks for financing. So there's multiple ways, like, two of them are at a technical level that I said, and the other one would be more political in terms of putting pressure on the Federal Reserve. But there is ways to do it. And then there's a bunch of ways where you can just put a bunch of, in Chicago, poor people in Chicago have a bunch of fines and fees put on them, right? In terms of parking tickets, in terms of towing. And these are like things that are owned by like private equity corporations and stuff like that. But and they get fined and feed to death, right? And literally to death for some folks, and certainly into poverty and bankruptcy. And these are fines and fees that are supposedly on their face egalitarian, open for everybody, right? But it's the things that you fine and fee that then usually determine if poor people are going to have to pay more of it and working class people are going to have to pay more of it, or if rich people are going to have to pay more of it. So we could just easily just fine and fee the things that rich people do. And you could just, do a surveying of like the things rich people do. Rich people like to buy condos. Rich people like to buy this, rich people like to buy development things, and you can just fine and fee those things just as much and with just as much intensity, and then be able to work around the whole, like, you can't tax based on income or wealth holdings. And there's tons of solutions out there like that would, bring in the money that's needed to fund all our programming. It's just not gone after, and, it's just not fought for. People are like, oh, it sounds a little bit too silly, or it sounds a little bit too this, and, whatever nonsense. And so, but, I think politically, we're never going to keep winning if we say yes and okay to these things, and we say yes and okay to these things and don't have any sort of alternative presented. Like the innovation of Bernie Sanders was not that he was just saying medical companies are, our health insurance companies are bad and they're doing us wrong. He said, no, like, Medicare for all, here's the solution. Here's the simple thing that could just take care of this, and we have those tools without having to say, oh, the state won't let us do it, or the federal government won't let us do it.
You point out that with your colleagues, that these modest gains come at a heavy price, an 11% increase in funding for the violent institution of policing. Some on our side, even from the Public Budget Coalition table, have claimed this increase was locked in due to the approved Fraternal Order of Police contract. But this is inaccurate at best and disingenuous at worst. How is any contractual obligation with the FOP to raise the police budget inaccurate at best and disingenuous at worst?
Yeah, because the FOP contract covers labor costs primarily, right? And the 11% increase was primarily for labor costs, right? They had an increase in income. And so, what some on the left and folks would like to say then is just that, like, that's locked in. You can't do nothing about it. And if you did, then it's like a violation of the contract, and then you're gonna have to fight them, which is like, all right, cool. Like, let's not fight them on it, right? And I think just having a background in labor, even though I don't believe police are workers, right? I'm always suspect of going back on any kind of contract with in that kind of manner, right? Because it'd be used maybe for other folks. So I don't think. Yeah, I don't even think it would be strategic to go that route. I think what you can easily do is just cut a bunch of programs that the FOP has, right? Not the FOP, sorry, the Chicago Police Department has, right? They just did this big spending on hiring community organizers, people who make gardens. They have a data analysis department. They have the ShotSpotter contract, right? There's all these other ways and all these other things that you can just easily cut 11% of the police budget, and police would be fine. Policing would be fine. There would be no impact on the actual how much you're paying a police officer or honoring an FOP contract by doing that, and that's not even there's no violation that could then be brought to a court that would then stop you from doing the cut, and that could have easily happened. And and I think some of the aldermen fought for the socialist aldermen for sure made sure that those budget amendments got brought forward. But then, and I think this is when, you're talking more about the coalition budget table. The coalition budget table itself didn't want to make a strong stand on the amendments itself and really do focused turnout around that and really make that a point of contention. And even open up the conversation that it is possible to honor those the increases due to the FOP contract and still cut 11%. If we're not doing that, then I don't know what we're doing. We're the left, we're radicals and progressives, and if we don't fight for these things, I just literally in informal political spaces, I don't know who is. And then I don't know how you convince people, especially when I think of my homies and my comrades who are just cynical about and this is not even just woke world activist world, right? This is just people who are just cynical and exhausted from politics and government and just do not trust anything. The same folks who then are skeptical of a vaccine now, right? Is that I don't know how you then convince them, hey, go knock doors for this person and turn out to vote for this person, and we're going to do A, B, and C, if they don't even see you fighting for it. Think about your favorite basketball team or whatever. Even if they lose at times, you just want to see them fight. You just want to see them go down and be this is what I stand on, this is what I believe in, and this is what we're going to fight for, even if they lose, right? And that's why I'm it's not so much about a yes or a no vote or anything like that, which is how publicly were folks out there saying no, there is a way to reduce the police budget. No, there is a way to get progressive revenue in the city of Chicago. No, we do not have to pay these banks, and this is how we're not going to pay these banks, And I think on the bank thing, I think folks were a little bit better on, but even then that was a contentious fight to keep that fight going. So, yeah.
You write that 3 defund-related budget amendments were sent to the Budget Committee to push back against this increase in police budget. However, they were not fought for to be on the agenda for the Budget Committee, let alone on the agenda for the full City Council. These amendments included reducing the advertising budget of the Chicago Police Department by 90%, cutting vacancies for 2022, and ending what you were just mentioning, the ShotSpotter contract. So let me just go through each of these. First of all, Jasson, The Chicago Police Department has an advertising budget, because I have never seen an ad by the Chicago Police Department unless they're so good that I didn't even recognize that it was an ad by the Chicago Police Department. So what is the Chicago Police Department doing with an advertising budget?
Well, it's their propaganda arm, right? So, and it's, it's one part of like, them allowed to have their own Twitter accounts, and then to like set the narrative to reporters, right? They have, and it's, they try to separate the communications department from the advertising department, but it's better to think of them as one and the same. And so that like if they're giving like their narrative of events that happened, or like the supposed crime panic that we're in, or the Chicago Reader did really good reporting on the like supposed like carjackings that were happening, right? That was a product of like our of the Chicago Police Department advertising department and the Chicago Police communications department, which is why I think any coercive institution within like the United States should not have its own propaganda arm, should not have its own communications and advertising arm for these reasons, because they'll abuse it and they'll say their side of the things and their version of the things. And, it's on folks who can actually do an independent review of to assess what's actually happened, right? When there is like, let's say, shooting or acts of violence, things like that. But yeah, I think when we think of how we have propaganda and why we have propaganda. So like when you go to like, let's say, sometimes you'll be, I don't know if you've ever been like at a Little League event, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's honoring Cops Day, that's the CPD advertising budget. It's, and then partially their community relations one. Or if it's like you're ever at a, they do this also is, like when there's like big block parties, or like, like all the festivals in the parks during the summer, that's another way then the like CPD will spend money to like boost its image and its brand and all this other stuff, meanwhile, right, like you never see like the Chicago Public Library table at any of these festivals or things. You never see the honor your librarian day. You never see the honor your even fire person, or your Chicago Park District attendant day or anything like that. So that's what it goes to pay for. It's terrible. I don't know what else to say about it. And,
the Chicago Police vending tables too at fairs and festivals that you see here in Chicago. It's always the table that nobody is at, and it's just sitting there wasting time. It's the most boring table. So what is meant by cutting vacancies?
Yeah, that so Chicago, like supposedly has a lot of like, well, not supposedly, it does. Like, I mean, like on the actual budget, there is vacancies of unfulfilled unfulfilled police officer positions in the budget, and they're comparing it to past budgets, right? And like what's supposedly said is needed to have a fully functioning Chicago Police Department. So what the Socialist Caucus and then the Progressive Budget Table was saying, like, stop saying that we have vacancies. There isn't vacancies, and say that we're not going to fill those positions anymore, that like we don't need those more police. And so they were fighting on that. They're not currently funded though. And if you were going to get to 11%, I guess that's a way of getting to 11%, but usually you want, yeah. And I just want to caution, the 11% thing is, that is not divest invest. That's not defund, right? Defund and divest and defund police, refund communities, or divest from police, invest in communities, is the idea that like, the interpersonal violence that we face today and the structural violence that we face today, especially on the south and west side of Chicago, and in most working class and low income neighborhoods of color, and even white working class neighborhoods though too, they face that because we have invested so much into policing that and that policing does have the impact of actually increasing that, like that level and intensity of the thing that they call crime, poverty, and divestment. And sucks away the actual investment that those communities need. And so when we say the 11% would just keep the budget as it was last year. It still doesn't divest from police and actually invest in communities. The things that we should have been fighting for was a 25% reduction in police, or a 50% reduction, or some sort of reduction in policing, and then taking that money and investing it in violence interrupters, other preventative services, violence prevention services that get at the root cause of violence, and interrupt violence in our communities. And that's just, I think that's the saddest part, is like that conversation wasn't happening. It was about like how to handle the 11% increase, instead of being like, no, it's defund, it's divest and invest in our communities, period, end of subject. Similar to how, the right wing is about taxes, or, abortion, right? Like, I think, we need to be that principled about divest, invest.
The DSA says that the shot spotter contract, our alder people have all officially committed to canceling the shot spotter contract, an inaccurate technology used by the Chicago Police Department to detect gunfire that is expensive, deadly, and disproportionately targets Chicago's black and brown communities. We will stand alongside our alder people and allies at the doors and in streets until we cancel the shot spotter contract. To you, how dangerous is shot spotter, and why doesn't it work, Jasson?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm not sure how familiar people are with the murder of Adam Toledo by the Chicago police this summer, but he was a boy from Chicago, and he got the police got I guess a detection from a shot spotter device saying shots had been fired, and that's like how shot spotter, like they're like a Silicon Valley inspired company that they claim that they keep people safe because they're able to detect when shootings are happening, and then the police are able to respond more rapidly to prevent stuff from happening, I guess. There's no actual like reported incident of police, of police being able to prevent something from ever happening because of this technology. So then, but what does happen is that then you have officers who get a call, a shots fired call, which put officers on like, yo, like, oh, like I might get shot. So then they're coming in there with more energy, and they murdered this 13-year-old boy, and when they showed up for the call. And so and there's other instances like that in regards to shot spotter. And so we just need to get rid of it. I mean, all that kind of tech stuff is nonsense. It's just not. It's it just puts more of a target on the backs of Black and Latinx and other people of color, working, especially working class folks, and it does nothing to actually prevent murders that are happening in Chicago, and shootings that are happening in Chicago, especially on the South and West Side, that people do want to prevent and do want to stop. And if anything, people are making millions of dollars off of it. That's what ShotSpotter does. They make millions of dollars pretending that they can prevent murders on the South and West Side of Chicago, when in fact they can't. And in fact, in our opinion, they're just as liable and culpable for being the cause of even more murders, not just interpersonal ones, but ones by police.
One last question for you, Jasson. We have been speaking with Jasson Perez, co-author with Bettina J, and past This Is Hell guest Brian Bean on the Rampant Mag article, Crumbs and Police Funding. Crumbs and Police Funding, assessing the new Chicago budget. One last question for you, Jasson, and as we do with all of our guests, we promise our final question is the question from hell, the question we hate to ask, you may hate to answer, or our audience is going to hate your response, and especially members of our audience who identify as liberals are going to hate your response. You write that when liberals need to find money to fund something like police, they find the money. But when they want to cut or not fund something, even when we can pay for it, they still make the cuts. To you, Jasson, what explains why liberals apparently prioritize police over community services? Do Chicago liberals support addressing social services with a carceral system more than with social services?
Yeah, I mean, that is, to me, the liberal project supports that because, most of their funders are rich people, right? Particularly rich white people who are property developers and, financiers, people in finance, people in tax, right? And that's who they care about. And, that's what police are for, is to enforce capitalist property relations and to make sure that, working class people not just can't rise up, right? Because I think sometimes that's where, I think that's where the analysis stops. Not just rise up, like in terms of the total revolution sense, but even make social democratic reforms. Like police are there to prevent that, right? Police are there to, whenever there's a strike, who do we see there, right? We see police, right? Whenever there's a protest, for sure we see that. In order to prevent workers from organizing, workers are surveilled and punished for doing so. So that's, liberals are okay with it because they believe that they'll still be in power and they'll still be, and liberals who are especially in part of the Democratic Party, that they'll still be in the Democratic Party and they'll be fine, that it's not going to come with that cost. And especially if you're in a quote unquote like blue city, it really doesn't have a cost. The costs weren't coming until you had explicit socialists run via Democratic Socialists of America, where then the costs have started to occur to them. And that's why we need more socialists elected, and I don't think this is definitely not, we shouldn't look at this as like, we should disregard then the electoral socialist project. No, I think if anything, we need more of it. And then we need better strategy and we need stronger conversations about our political program and how we want to achieve it in an incremental way. And then also in like a maximalist way.
Jasson, thank you so much for being on the show this week. This is a fantastic piece of writing that you and Bettina and Brian collaborated on. Thank you so much for being on our show and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Take care.
You've been listening to a This Is Hell interview. For more interview hell and to support the show, visit thisishell.com.